science writer, regular guest, commentator, all around culture critic. Mike, how are you?
Hey, just fine. Here we are in June. It's Pride Month.
Yeah. I want to talk about what I would call an epidemic of mass murders. I mean, I know that I'm still on the topic, and I'm just trying to get a handle on what the hell is going on in this country, where we have people showing up and blowing people away at an unprecedented level. Am I wrong about that, or does it seem to be an epidemic?
Well, we have to get a little more specific here. All right. Don Feder had a column where he talked about the U.S. is third in the world in gun homicides. However, if you remove Detroit, Philly, Chicago, and St. Louis, we're 189th out of 193. So
Right.
I think that every time one of these comes up, they are never, have you noticed they're never properly investigated? Even this one in Uvalde, Texas,
Right.
the school police chief, or whatever his title is, who's now a city council member, great promotion, is stonewalling. They're not answering any questions. So you can talk about an epidemic, if you will, but when you look at the number of gun homicides, the percentage of that's in these mass shootings is really quite tiny. That doesn't mean that the people on these events are any less dead, but it seems that it's sort of the old Stalin thing, in reverse kind of. No one seems to care about the fact that there's thousands of these homicides per year, but if you pick a particular incident, then it's supposed to be a cause célèbre. I would propose to you that there's something very fishy going on here. All right, what do I mean by that? One, none of these are ever properly investigated, ever.
Yes.
You can look back the last 10, 20 years, and you will never find any definitive information about what happened, how the guy procured all these weapons, how he was able to get through supposed security barriers. In the case of the school shooting in Texas, there was no security at the school. The cops didn't go in and try to stop it. So you could talk conspiracy theory here if you wish, but maybe people should be asking, what is special about these events that they're never investigated, and there's always something fishy about it? I mean, am I paranoid here?
No, I think you're right. I mean, it goes back to Columbine, really, when there's always something about these things that seemed incomplete. They were never approached scientifically, like what exactly happened, what exactly do these things have in common, and that you make the point very well that the country has a high homicide rate because of these big Democrat-run liberal cities, and a lot of it is, let's be honest, black on black crime.
Yeah,
black people are
to just underscore that for a second, if I might. It's involved in crime. Okay?
That's right. It's in the commission of a crime. And those things are motivated for that reason. You got drug gangs. You've got all kinds of reasons for people getting shot. And that's something that you're right. They're not addressing that. But I want to talk specifically about these mass murders, because I do think that in this case, this country is a little bit unique. I don't think this is going on in other countries. We have somebody showing up and blowing people away like this at a supermarket or at a school or at a church. And there's something about it that just seems abnormal. It is something that is relatively new. It didn't happen before. There was one famous, there've always been like serial killers who go out and they kill prostitutes, and they do it over time. I mean, that goes back to Jack the Ripper. I understand that. I'm not even really talking about that. I'm talking about these people who just show up and blow people away without any motivation. I mean, maybe it might have a racial thing, but even then, I mean, the Ku Klux Klan and racial groups, they're not showing up and murdering black people.
No.
I mean, this is a new phenomenon. There's something very weird going on here. And you are working the issue a little bit here. You're moving in on the core question by taking a look at certain facts, like that we don't get a full investigation. A lot of stuff is covered up. You know, there are situations like the guy that shot up the Las Vegas country concert.
Right.
There's still information about that they're not releasing. I mean, it's like all classified. You know, it's a very strange sort of a fishy cover up around all of these things. And we don't get to what happened. You bring up the point, where did people get, you know, these kind of weaponry? Like the guy at in Uvalde, he had almost $10,000 worth of weaponry. Where did he get this? This is an unemployed high school dropout. Nobody's investigating the source of it.
And no one will.
Yeah, and they're not talking about, you know, making a school set up. I mean, you know, like when, you know, my family, my own daughter went to a school which had one door that only opened out. You know, you couldn't get in. You could only go out the doors. It was a strengthened building. It had electronic surveillance around it. And at the front door was a man who had been a former military man with a gun that you could see. And he was sitting in a booth with television screens watching the whole premises. And you didn't just walk in. You had to check in through his checkpoint. And that was fine. It was a very secure place. And nobody thought twice about it. And it worked well. We don't have anything even remotely like that in these schools. And that particular school, apparently the Robb School, had wide open doors and nobody was paying any attention. Now, I understand that people make mistakes, but there doesn't seem to be much coordination on the part of the administration to figure this out and I'm not saying they need to give every teacher a weapon, but there should be at least someone on the premises who's trained properly and in weaponry and who probably carries one. I mean, I know it's a fictional movie, but Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? He had a weapon. I mean, he was there, you know, watching the school. You know, you have to have that at these places. The state of Israel, I know that that's not the same thing as this country, because there you have people who are terrorists. But there was an incident in 1975 where a couple of people crossed over the border of Lebanon and they seized a nursery school. Now, Now, the problem there, and at that time, Israelis were insanely thinking about things like gun control, all right? Now, at that time, the army got involved, the government got involved, which was a mistake, because then you have an overreaction, and then there's a big shootout, and 50 children were killed. But since then, you have every school in Israel and every institution where younger people go, where you have retired military personnel, usually a bubby and a zaidi, you know, an elderly parent, who know how to handle a gun and who are there with their gun watching over the place. And there has never since been anything like that happening, because they're ready for it and because they've handled it if anything remotely like that happens. These people are looking for easy targets. They're looking for gun-free zones. They're looking for something that's soft. You know, the guy that shot the movie theater in Colorado, he went around looking for a theater that was in a gun-free zone. And the particular theater that he targeted actually had a sign saying, "This is a gun-free zone." That's why he knew he could go in and do it. But there's something even deeper going on here that no one discusses. And I'm not saying I know what it is, and maybe I'm putting on a little bit of a tin hat here. But first of all, I think it's safe to say that every single one of these cases, from Columbine right up till now, involve young men who are on a psych drug. Now, am I wrong about that?
I'm not sure it's 100%, but it's very high.
And if you look at the fine print of those psych drugs, it includes homicide.
Yeah.
not to mention suicide and other side effects. They'll list that on the label. People don't take the time to take a look at the drugs, even that they're taking, to see some of the side effects. And when you give that to a young person who doesn't have who's not, and I'm not saying I'm against it in every case, but you have younger people who don't have the emotional and mental, not to mention physical maturity to handle these things. And then they sit in the basement watching violent stuff on the tube, and they're looking at porn, and they're looking at who knows what else. You end up, with a person that is, lacking in some of the most basic functionalities of compassion and empathy that most people have. I mean, you have a psychopath, basically.
Well, I think that what we have to do is follow this kind of thread, which, as I said at the beginning, no one ever seems to. All right. My wife's a teacher, and there's an you can't just walk into the school. All right. So you had a school of which all security was abandoned. No one's addressing why. All right. You have a guy who had no apparent source of income that spends close to $10,000 on acquiring weapons. Where do you get the money?
Right.
Don't worry, you're never going to find out.
Mm-hmm.
Because instead, what you're going to find out is there's going to be an immediate call for gun control. And it's very hard to avoid coming to the conclusion that there's some other agenda behind this. I mean, on some of the right-wing sites, they're talking about a false flag. It's not really a false flag.
No, it's not a false flag.
The shooter in Texas was the shooter.
Oh, yeah. No,
I think it's a false agenda, because immediately all areas of inquiry are stopped. Don't bother trying to, you will never find out these details. So either this is somehow encouraged, aided and abetted behind the scenes. I think everything's on the table now. You could call.
See, now you're touching on something that gets to my thinking on this. I mean, a little bit. And by the way, it is not a false flag. It's a real killer. At the same time, it does, you raise suspicion when there's all this secretiveness around it, and we don't really get to an actual scientific look at what's going on. But, look, there is no question that after World War II, the CIA conducted what was called the MK Ultra program.
Right.
And that was eventually exposed in the 1960s and ultimately done away with in the 1970s during the Church Committee hearing. At least we think it was done away with.
Well,
and right, I mean, this is CIA. We don't know what they're doing. It's secret by nature. It's a legalized secret society. They what they do is by law secret. You can't talk about it if you're in it. And they were engaging in mind control experiments, including implanting, devices into the brains, first of cats and then of people. And that there are a lot of people who have reported on this and having been subject to this kind of thing. And this was back in the 60s. You can imagine how sophisticated they are now. Now it's a fairly open secret that even Elon Musk has a company which is developing a brain chip. And DARPA had a segment on 60 Minutes where they were bragging about their brain chip and how wonderful this is going to be, because it's going to program all aspects of a person's health. And, they can have super consciousness, and there's almost like they're some kind of a cult. And, I don't think it can be dismissed that these people are somehow tampered with to do this. Now, why our so-called deep state would want this, I don't know. I have no idea why they'd want it.
Well, let me suggest something, that
No.
If you wanted to remove guns from people, the easiest way to do it would be to have a cascade of these incidents. And then reasonable measures would be put in place. They're already talking about so-called red flag laws. I mean, the fact that that's even being considered is scary as hell. That means that anybody can call up law enforcement and say, Joe Blow over here is a little weird, and I think his gun should be taken away.
Right.
What could possibly go wrong with that? right? So at this point, you have to consider that there's a concerted effort in favor of promoting crime. All right, here's another example.
Mhm.
What exactly did the government do during all these riots, 2020 and 2021, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and so on? What exactly did they do to stop it?
They stopped, well, Trump tried, but they stopped him, and they demonized him for even trying to stop it. And of course, the COVID rules went right out the window with that one.
Yeah.
Everything was that this is fine. Just like recently, the WHO said that the gay rallies are fine, even though they know that the monkey disease is a gay disease. Oh no, that's fine. The rallies are more important than that.
Right.
They're willing. In other words, the science around that's out the window. They're willing to look the other way for a political agenda. But the question of, like, the red flag laws. First of all, at least in the case of the Buffalo shooter, and in the case of the guy who showed up at the church in Charleston, South Carolina, and I think in the case of the Lakeland, Florida shooter, the government did know that this guy was potentially going to do this. The Buffalo guy had threatened his high school already. He had a nickname in the high school, which was high school shooter.
Yeah.
And and yet they did nothing. I mean, the case of the guy in I think Lakeland, Florida, his mother was calling the FBI saying, "Do something. This guy's dangerous." They did nothing.
Well,
They
shouldn't
knew.
it be suspicious that they did nothing? I mean,
Well, that's the question. I mean, rather than demonize the whole country with these red light laws, where anybody, as you say, can be reported. If you don't like someone, you could call them up, and it's totally open to abuse. In the same way that, like, restraining orders are open for abuse. I mean, not that you shouldn't get them if you need them, but eventually it became so ridiculous that anytime there was a divorce, usually the husband was put on a restraining order list. It just was used that way. So you're going to end up with these things where anybody can accuse anyone, and you're going to lose all your rights. But at the same time, if someone is on the radar screen as a proven danger, where there's really no question, I mean, it seems to me that they shouldn't be able to get a firearm, and that we should know about who they are.
But here's the point. Every one of these cases, you will always hear, "Oh yeah, the cops were watching this guy. They thought he was," but they didn't do anything about it. How come you never hear about, well, the police stopped a shooting because they realized this guy was off his rocker, and so you never hear those stories. So how can I do anything other than conclude that this is being encouraged?
Well, yeah, but I agree. I think that there is some weird symmetry here where this is an agenda by which it is encouraged. I don't know why, and I don't know what. If they're trying to disarm the public, I don't think it's going to work.
Oh, that's what happened in New Zealand. There was that shooting.
Yeah, this is in New Zealand. I mean,
I get it.
You have 350 million guns, and you have something like 99% of people who own guns are law-abiding. You've got both Democrat and Republican. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a member of the NRA. This isn't even an ideological thing. The biggest state in the union in terms of per capita gun ownership is Vermont. So, this is something that transcends those categories. The American people understand the value of keeping and bearing arms. I don't think they're going to get to do that in this country. I mean, I could be wrong, but
they can try.
Maybe they'll keep trying, and they'll keep killing children. They'll keep sending out someone mind-controlled program, like Manchurian person, to blow up more children until eventually we'll finally, capitulate, and we'll pull our hair out because they'll have anarchy. You can't stand it anymore after all. So maybe that's the strategy. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do is connect the dots. They're never investigated. It's always the same conclusion: gun control. It doesn't matter how many laws there are, this still happens. So, and they show no interest in preventing crime. So I can only conclude there's a sinister agenda, which is disarming the public. And you saw what happened when they disarmed Australia. then it turned into essentially a fascist dictatorship with the COVID laws.
I know. I mean, Australia, what the hell? I mean, this is a country where people were ex-cons who settled there in the 19th century and the 18th century, and there they are creating a prison state. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think any country became more. I mean, they were setting up camps, and they had, people were being arrested for stepping outside their door at the height of that. It was almost as bad as China.
Yeah. So I think that's what's really going on. The fact that it's never investigated beyond that point ever. I mean, there's been
Yes.
so many of these things. You don't have the full story on any one of them, and you never will. And,
Right.
And
now, look, I tend to be
asked,
And I have been, I mean, I talked about this yesterday on my show, and people accused me of going woke because I actually think that it is not unreasonable for people to get a license before they purchase an AR-15. I don't know, I personally don't know why anybody would want a gun like that, but if they do, there ought to be some training involved and maybe a little psychological test. I mean, maybe, am I wrong to think that?
I think the trouble is that you're being reasonable, but in the world of gun laws, it's always a slippery slope.
Right.
And the people are concerned that, okay, if we make a special case for AR-15s, then why don't we make a special case for some other kind of weapon?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, the present occupant of the White House, assuming that there's any coherency there, has already, kind of has already let the cat out of the bag by saying that there should be a ban on handguns. So, yeah, I mean, I think and that's wrong. It's a big concern. And you have the squad, and we're joined by Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, putting legislation forth that would make it so that if a policeman went on the property of a high school, the high school and the school district would lose, or the police department would be completely defunded. In other words, the defund the police agenda.
Oh, that's going to encourage crime. I mean,
of course. I mean, that's insane. Are you kidding? You want to have a child in school, the police can't go there? I mean, these people are out of their freaking minds.
Well, I mean, I think the agenda is very clear. And of course, it comes back to my favorite word, denialism. Oh, surely, Charles, you can't believe that the government would want to encourage this. Well, you know what? I believe the government does.
Well, they are the government. They're in Congress, and they're actually having a bill, and apparently they were inspired by Black Lives Matter to do this. But that's not sane. You could say that, there might be extreme, seems like everything now, there are extreme examples or reactions on both sides. Maybe that's an agenda to divide the country more. But that's an extreme agenda, obviously. I mein, would anybody, you might as well ban people's right to lock their door to their house, to lock their car door. That's crazy. You have to have self-defense. And especially with a school where you have children and they're vulnerable.
Oh, they don't care.
And they're going to ban, I mean, really? I mean, they're going to say a policeman can't go there? I don't know what the hell these people are thinking.
Well, what they're thinking of is, and even you don't want to come to that conclusion. They want to encourage violence and death so that the public will be outraged and give them even more power. And every time the government has grabbed power in a particular area, it's gone wrong. I mean, we talk a lot, and I write a lot about healthcare. There's no reason the federal government should be in healthcare. They've screwed it up. They've never done anything right in healthcare over the entire time since Medicare when they got involved with it. But somehow it seemed like a great idea at the time. And it was always the same sort of explanation. When Medicare came out, oh no, this is only going to have to do with old people, and we have no interest at all in expanding our reach into the total healthcare system, which was exactly what they said. And before Medicare came in, there were a rather small number of people, when the AMA was actually a decent organization, and you can see these videos on YouTube, where they were saying what I'm saying now, that no, this isn't good. They're going to start controlling everything. Well, here's what happens. God forbid you should have an idea that's contrary to their agenda on COVID. You can lose your license.
Well, that's right. I think that's the product of Obamacare, which was the ultimate seizure of the health industry by the government. Yeah. And we've talked about that. My own doctor, all of a sudden there's a different attitude toward COVID. Something is happening. They can't be themselves. They cannot have a doctor-patient relationship with you, that they actually treat you. And instead they're looking at all these rules, and it's all very externally controlled. And the irony, in a way, when you talk about the government interfering in healthcare, in a way, it's the same as the business of gun control, in that, we do have laws in place to regulate guns, and we have laws in place that protect people from quackery in medicine. You have insurance to do that. You could, if a doctor does something that's wrong, they can get sued, right? Malpractice, right? So, you have that already in place. You don't need to have the government come in and start to manage the whole thing.
Well, this is the whole thing, and that was some of the arguments when I wrote that piece last week that had to do with None Dare Call It Treason. Mm-hmm. Everything Stormer said is even more true now. It's just gotten worse.
Yes.
This big power grab, and again, I keep saying this. Everybody notices it, but most people are afraid to talk about it because that would be a conspiracy theory, right?
And that's, of course, forbidden now. You can't have conspiracy theories unless you're saying that the Russians, the Ruskies, are coordinating with Trump to steal the 2016 election.
Yeah, that's okay.
Or if you're saying that then they bring it back after having Mueller in his brown shirts throw old men in prison, and drag them out of bed in the 4 o'clock in the morning. Then they finally admit that was a hoax and a conspiracy theory. So they bring it back in the 2020 election by saying that the Russians, the Ruskies, once again, are coordinating with Trump to create Hunter Biden's laptop, right? Those obviously are conspiracy theories that have been proven to have been untrue, but that's fine.
So it is a little depressing.
It is.
Of the media has capitulated to this. I'm not really sure what happened. The media was always sort of a cheering section for the establishment, but never to this extent. Even during the FDR, where 99% of the media approved of everything he did, there were some dissenting voices.
That's right. Yeah. You had, who was it? Westbrook Pegler was his name?
Yeah.
Whatever. And there's a couple of good people. And the McCormicks, who ran the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yeah.
Or the Chicago Tribune.
The Tribune, yeah. But I think people get scared. They get lazy. In fact, on ACSH, the American Council of Science and Health, they posted an article about how Science Magazine is now taking a stand on, quote, reasonable gun control. And obviously, this was just to garner publicity, just like, the Marine Corps is now all over Pride and so on and so forth. I don't understand why people have to jump on these bandwagons.
There's enormous social pressure. And look what they're doing to children. Putting aside the fact that they're having to face gunmen coming in and blowing their heads off, you have them, being taught about, at a young age, about gender confusion,
right,
to the point where you're supposed to think there's a virtue to giving children these drugs that weaken your skeleton, that weaken bone density. Do you know what that's going to do to somebody? That's criminal. That's like what Mengele did to Jews, except at least with Mengele, they weren't pretending that this was good. They weren't saying, "Oh, this is going to improve your life. This is going to make you happy. This is going to make you, more fulfilled."
Well,
They
this is it.
and what are they talking about with the surgeries? That is this? Are they talking castration? I mean, what do they mean surgery?
Well, there's various levels of it. Okay, if you're the guy at University of Pennsylvania swimming, it's completely a farce. He
hasn't done anything except grow his hair long.
Yeah, he grows his hair long. I understand he still goes out with women.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's not complete farce.
Totally nonsense.
He was a mediocre swimmer who wanted to win some trophies.
And he knew that the idiots in the media and in academia would get behind him.
Oh,
so it was clever on his part. But, going back to Mengele, it's interesting that he's always brought up in this context, but you would have to conclude, I think, as I did, that he is really small time compared to what's going on now.
Right.
For several reasons. One is, obviously, this was in the context of a prison camp. Some of the research Mengele was doing was legit military stuff based on horrible exposures that war fighters could get in combat and so on. Some of it was just insane, but he had no pretense that he was doing good for people.
Well, that's the point. I mean, when you're doing human experiments that blatantly, you don't, in the case of these doing this stuff to children, they're claiming that it's going to make them happy. It's going to make them feel good to castrate a boy. I mean, is that what they're doing? Is that going to make somebody grow up and
chemical castration?
That's insane. I mean, that's criminal.
In some cases, actually surgical. But
something. If someone does that, they should be sent up to the big house. That's criminal to children.
Well, of course, it won't be because it's legitimate, quote unquote, medical treatment. Because everybody's afraid to speak up. And what my late father-in-law said when all these regulations were coming in. He said it's going to come down to people dying in the streets. Well, what he didn't get about it was that, no, they're not going to let people die in the streets because that's bad publicity. Instead, they're going to control every aspect of what you do. And most people are going along with it. And
it's a war on children. I mean, you've got the shooters, you've got the sex change, and you've got all that propaganda about gender, which is a made-up concept, by the way. It was something that was created by sociologists. And then you have the masks. That's nothing to do with science. That was the teachers' union making a deal with WHO and others to have children with these masks on their face. It's criminal.
So
and then on top, and then the fourth horseman in the gang is critical race theory, which is teaching children to hate each other and to view each other based on race.
Well, this is why there's an
No wonder they're getting depressed. I'm hearing testimony from parents around the country.
Oh, yeah.
Children are now experiencing depression. There's an increase in suicide. It's almost like, creating the poison and the antidote in the same lab. They're creating these, children who are really having problems because they created the problems. And then they step in and respond to those problems by putting them on drugs, by doing who knows what else. I mean, we're abusing our children. I'm just grateful that my daughter's out of school. But I mean, it's just, when I look at it now, it's atrocious. It is an atrocity. It's a human crime. These are crimes against our children.
Well, you can take solace in one thing. There's a little wasp walking over my desk. You can take solace in one thing. They will always jump the shark. There will be some incident that people are going to finally react. That'll be the tipping point. I've been waiting for it.
Yeah, but now with the media so controlled, you're not going to hear about it. I mean, the media is not talking about my own congresswoman here, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib, and other shrill congresswomen putting this bill forth that would make policemen not be able to go on the campus because they know that's not going to be popular. So it's all covered up. No one knows about it. They just, the masters who are running the means of communication decide to shape everything in a way that most people don't know about it. You and I know because we're not in the normie world, but most people don't. It's just,
well, but it's going to be increasingly difficult to hide this from the normal people. They can try, but it's, I mean, when the Florida shooting occurred, there were a number of parents who were outspoken about what the official reaction was, and they try to quiet them down. And what they did is
they put forth a bunch of students who were part of, who were willing to spout the official
establishment line.
That's right.
And it's going to break, but in the meantime, people just have to wise up and stop engaging in denialism. And denialism has an allure to it. I mean, who the hell would want to believe that the government is encouraging violence, that the government doesn't?
You don't want to think it, yeah.
All right. But I'm very fond of inductive reasoning where you come to these conclusions, and this is why it's much more powerful, I believe, than deductive reasoning, because you make these observations, and what other conclusion can you come to? So you go from small things to a bigger concept, and a lot of people are extremely uncomfortable with inductive reasoning for that reason. When I made the point at ACSH that if you go back to the early 1960s, there were none of these mass shootings.
Well, that's right.
There were proportionally even more guns per number of people.
There were. I mean, you used to be able to get a gun at the counter at Woolworths.
Yeah.
I mean, Sears and Roebuck, you could walk in and buy a gun. It wasn't even, I think there was just an age restriction.
That's exactly right. So there were no mass shootings then. All right. But what changed? Well, what changed was, I believe, the abandonment of morality, starting with the school prayer decisions and then going from there.
Yes.
Right. So the immediate reaction of the liberals, no, how can you prove that? And I said, well, you can't prove anything with humans, but you can use your brain, and you have to, the onus, I'm afraid, is on you to explain why there were proportionally more guns, there were fewer laws, and we never had any of this stuff. Because not only has morality been abandoned, we now celebrate vice. Okay?
Yeah. No,
So what do you really expect? And
no, I think, look, I'm old enough to remember when school prayer was removed from schools, when the Murray decision on by the Supreme Court. I think it was 1962.
There was Murray. There was actually two before that. There were federal cases,
Mm-hmm.
The Abington and.
Yeah, but Murray was the one that said, you can't even have a moment of silence.
Right, and that was Bible reading. So, but I mean, it all went down that.
It did, because I remember when that came out, and I was, I think, in kindergarten or first grade at the time, and I remember it was a big, big deal. And President Kennedy got on and made us talk and said so at the time, that this is a very serious time, and he was against that decision, and that this is something that it's going to take a long time to see the consequence, and that there was a sense, oh, God has been banned from school. Well, and I think that did happen, and it was replaced by humanism, basically.
Yeah, well, that worked out well.
Yeah, that's what we all It was a new day. But
But
yeah, that's right.
even that line of reason is extremely unpopular. And I think it's extremely unpopular because it's obviously true. And people don't like being confronted with obvious truths, whether it's their personal health. Hey, maybe smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day isn't good for you. Well, that's
Right. Nobody wants to be
right. Yeah. Okay.
nobody wants to realize that they're wrong about something, especially if they've, kind of imbibed it for their whole life. You get stuck into it usually at a fairly young age. I think that maybe college age, early 20s, and that's it. Most people just go along. They kind of almost become automatons when it comes to these things.
Well, they have the same built-in arguments they had in the 5th grade. Well, no,
Right.
parent schools and witch trials and the Inquisition and
Right, all that stuff, the Crusades, and the right, and then the whole it was basically, I think that the school prayer and belief in a creator of the universe that's beyond us and our ability to manipulate, that was replaced by the pleasure principle of the ancient Greek,
Epicures.
yeah, Epicure, the what they call in the Talmud the Apocorus, which is a no-no in the Talmud. And basically the idea was that whatever feels good is good. If it feels good, if you enjoy it, that's a virtue. And that the ultimate virtue is pleasure. Everything is based on whatever the sensate is in the present. There's no past, there's no future. Everything is what it is. And, that was the generation that basically grew up in the 1960s. That was the glorification of it. And perhaps one of the most ultimate representatives of that generation in public, to go back a little bit in history, was none other than President Bill Clinton.
Right.
Whatever feels good, he'd wake up in the morning and he'd call his pollster and say, "Who am I today?"
Yeah.
And then this is what people want. This is what I'll be. Whatever, makes people happy is what I'll be and what I'll do. And obviously he had, excesses in a lot of areas, right? I mean, we all know about that. So, that he is a character that kind of represents that kind of thing. And it's gone in a very bad way. It's not that you can't enjoy life, but it's put into a proportional context with being responsible for your life, being responsible for your future, and putting in place parameters, and institutions that create parameters. The most basic one of all being marriage, frankly.
Yeah, well, I mean, all those things have been attacked
Sure.
purposefully. And
I mean, I brought up the Talmud. The Talmud says that if you're not married, you're not a full person.
Right.
Especially, I think, for men, but women too. You have to have that union in order to create the barriers. You can't live, I mean, the Talmud is concerned with Jewish life, but you can't live a Jewish life unless you're married. It's that simple. I mean, it's very strict about that.
now you always talk about being located in the belly of the beast and all these liberals. What do they really think deep down? I mean, I know what they talk about, but are they concerned about how society is going down the drain? Because if they were true to their beliefs, they'd be in favor of it, I would think.
I think they are in favor of it. I mean, to the extent that they have beliefs, they if you're involved in the pleasure principle, it's whatever, everything is external to you. You're talking about the latest comedy show or the latest movie or the latest theater or whatever it is you're into. Everything is going on outside. Everything is reaction to what's going on outside, with the ultimate principle being tolerance for everything that you don't like or everything that's outside, and that there's a virtue to that. But at its core, it's anarchistic and it's collectivist. The idea is that ultimately we should all fuse into some kind of a one world brain, or some sort of a This is the principle that's now openly being promoted by the World Economic Forum and Charles Schwab. And these are the people.
Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab.
Yeah.
Charles Schwab.
Yeah, I don't think
He's the banker. No, these are the people who are running the world. These are the combination of world leaders, the biggest CEOs, the wealthiest of people in the world. They are deciding, they want to destroy Russia. I'm not in favor of Russia. I don't like Putin or anything like that. But Russia is a country that came out of that. They had 70 years of communism and progressivism, so-called, where all of these things were implemented. They know what it was like, and they're moving away from it. They're moving toward a more functional, traditional society, a God-based society. I mean, I'm not saying that it's any utopia, but I'm pointing out that the war against them is because they're resisting this, frankly. And, I see anyone else who stands up to this world order as someone who's going to be subjected to an attack like that. And, we can't let them win. This is, they believe in evolution as the cornerstone of their faith, just like it was for the humanists. And once you accept that idea and that worldview, then you're going to strive toward creating a utopian, perfect Übermensch. That's the ultimate goal. There's no God, there's no creation.
Oh wait, didn't someone try that and it kind of failed after?
Yeah, I think someone did. It was called, the perfect blonde-haired, blue-eyed specimen that lived to be 200 years old and that had cosmic consciousness. It's called the Übermensch, right? And then they set up breeding farms so that they could breed together to create a new species. That is the ultimate result of the theory of evolution. And that is exactly what the World Economic Forum is talking about. A merge between the biological human being and machinery, computers. I mean, I'm not making this up.
Oh, no, I've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, this is transhumanism. This is Israeli author Harari, someone, the Homo sapiens. Now he's just come out with a new book called Homo Deus, the new God. The guy we would say he's a complete nut, but the fact is he seems to be the spiritual counselor of the World Economic Forum, him and his husband. And
of course.
Right, of course. and it's kind of it's a redo of the Übermensch, except these guys are in a position of influence that actually supersedes the Nazis. I mean, you can't criticize this. I can't go on YouTube and talk about this. I'm here on Rumble. Rumble is my main station. And by the way, just if I could just get in a quick plug here. Please. I'm live streaming this on TikTok. Please subscribe to my station on Rumble. Rumble is the flagship station. If you want to see the live stream, if you want to see different videos I'm downloading there on different topics, go to Rumble and subscribe to Moskowitz. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. You can drop off anytime you want, but it would be very helpful if you subscribe to my Rumble station, especially since YouTube has kind of frozen my account as of now. So,
well, if I were you, I'd be proud of that. That means you're big enough.
I shouldn't have been. I feel embarrassed that I paid so much attention to YouTube anyways. If I had paid that attention to Rumble and to these other stations, I'd probably have a much more advanced show at this point. I wasted my time with YouTube. I shouldn't have. It's a way, they've banned.
Broken the chains.
They have. And now I can say whatever the hell I want. And I see a lot of very solid people are no longer on YouTube. Charlie Kirk from the Starting Point USA, major young thinker, head of a big. He's no longer on YouTube. Jack Posobiec, no longer on YouTube. These guys had a following. Oh yeah, Steve Bannon, he was banned years ago. He's got a show that has had almost 100 million downloads.
Yeah,
and he doesn't have YouTube. So the hell with YouTube. I'm not going to bother with it. I'm forging forward. I'm doing some revisions on my Charles Moskowitz website. I've got some news stations that I'm putting up there. I'm starting to develop some new blogs. And I don't give a crap about YouTube. I mean, I don't know why I was even thinking about them all this time.
Well, don't feel bad about it because they were the big gun.
They are, and they still are, but I think they're going to be challenged. And I think the big challenger is going to be Rumble.
Yeah.
I think Rumble is coming up. Rumble is going to be the one that is going to take them on, I believe.
Well, Rumble is the one that was doing a lot of, let's call it political content. A lot of these other alternative video forms specialize in other things, like various types of shock videos and accidents and God knows what that were not on YouTube. But Rumble seemed to specialize in people who were banned, you know.
Right, and that, by the way, is not necessarily people on the right either.
No,
you know, the people on the left. I mean, it's not anyone who is a dissenter, if you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to this conspiracy theory thing we talked about earlier, that at this point, the definition of a conspiracy theory is any sort of explanation that runs counter to the establishment narrative.
That's right. That's a conspiracy.
I looked into this because I'm writing a new piece. I looked into this idea that the term conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA. And of course,
to describe the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, exactly. And the official reaction to that is that is a conspiracy theory, but it turns out that there are some documents that pretty much indicate that was one of their ways of going after the various Kennedy assassination theories, was to talk about alternative theories, conspiracies, and so on. So, for lack of a better term, it was part of the idea, and if you combine that with Saul Alinsky, that if you can mock something by use of this term conspiracy theory,
right?
Okay, what brought this up was a good friend of mine. He's got a kid in college now. They just finished as a freshman, and they're driving home from the school. And the kid says something like, Dad, it's going to be more difficult talking to you, and this guy's conservative, if you keep mouthing these conspiracy theories. So it's just amazing.
Sounds like my daughter.
Maybe it's just not the nature. You talk about the normies.
The normies, yeah.
I thought, when I was growing up in the 60s, everyone was supposed to be a rebel, but of course they weren't. They were all conformists.
They're supposed to be questioning authority, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
Now they're in authority.
Yes. So I'm disappointed that youth hasn't, risen up against this, but they were raised a different way. And I don't know, you go back in any generation, they pretty much go with the flow. I mean, you go
most people do. There's only a handful of people that raise up. I mean, the American Revolution was just a handful of people.
Yeah. Well, what about to get something near and dear to your heart? Of course, they talk about the Maccabees, but what they don't like talking
handful of people.
Most of the Jews went along.
No.
Yeah. So
it was a revolution within Judaism. Most of them were Romanized or they were Greek oriented. They were not, they were secular. The same people that run Judaism today. Yeah. They had no moral basis. They turned their back on the Torah and on the faith. And you had a small group of people, the Maccabees, who changed the course of history and achieved really, I think, probably what could be described as the first sovereign state, run by people, that represented a viewpoint. And that's why Hanukkah is so important, because that's what that's about.
They lost on a lot of people.
And they were a minority. They were a minority in their day. I mean, anytime you have people, it's always a small group of people that speak up. It's always the majority of people want to get along. the majority of people, as I said, in the 13 colonies were either pro-crown or they didn't give a damn.
Yeah.
You had a small group, and once that small group started to get traction, other people came along because they wanted to be part of it. But for the most part, people try to keep their nose clean. They don't want to get involved.
Well,
They
what
want
about, I mean, even in the most fundamental story of Exodus, you can make the same argument that even though history is written by the victors, so to speak, most of the Jews in Egypt, but you know what, we'll stay. And
Well, that's why they had us wander in the desert for 40 years. They
Yeah.
could have gotten to the promised land in 40 days if they set out, but they had to go 40 years because they had to die out that generation.
Yeah.
Because that generation was enslaved.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't understand freedom. They weren't ready for freedom. They didn't like, you know, it's a mentality. It's not just they had physically freed themselves, but they still had the mentality of a slave. It took another generation for people to sort of come up and experience freedom to the point where they could function as a free society. And you know, that's an interesting case of that.
Well, are the Jews kind of a bellwether for how this stuff goes? I mean, you can argue that
Yes.
right, during the David and Solomon era, they were conquering, they were leaders,
Right.
and then things start going bad.
Well, I mean, things went bad because, well, Solomon became corrupted by the fact that he had 1,000 wives.
Yeah.
And, you know, like it was like 700 concubines and 400.
I mean, one is hard enough, for God's sake.
I know. And then he started building palaces for them, in which case he started printing money.
Yeah.
And you had inflation, and you had, you know, before you know it, the government was running the currency, and they inflated the dollar to the point where people were starving. And they basically, the whole order collapsed shortly after he died. So,
there was
you know,
a succession of rotten kings.
That's right.
After he died, yeah.
After he died, I mean, and then his son took over, Rehoboam.
Yeah.
And people said, "Are you going to do anything better here? Are you going to reform? Are you going to?" And he goes, "Oh no, whatever my father did, I'm going to do it 3 times worse." And that's when the kingdom fell apart.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lesson there. But there was always a remnant that knew the faith, and you know, you had the prophets step out, and these were people. I mean, in a way, Jesus was in that category. They stepped out and they spoke truths at a time when it was not, you know, the majority of people really had strayed off the beaten path, and they suffered for it. You know, there's always that in every generation. There's enough people who can understand truths that they can keep a progressive movement alive. And I do think that, you know, I don't know if I mean, I have mixed feelings about this, but I do believe in Theodore Parker's talk about the moral arc, and that there are lessons learned in history, and that it does move the moral arc forward. It may bend slowly, but it's bending in the right direction. That we have learned things that have moved human society forward. Right now, I'm working on a new book, actually, about the Treaty of Westphalia, which most scholars and historians say was the founding of the modern idea of the nation state, and why that was progressive. And it was learned, it came about because of the 30 Years' War, which was devastating in Europe. You know, wiped out whole populations. 8 million people were killed. It was the bloodiest war that the world had ever known up until that point. And people were like, you know, the old order is not working. You know, the old regime, which at the time involved the Catholic Church, which improved after that. I mean, but we're talking about the old situation. You know, we need to have a new idea, which was the development of units of independent nation states, which would tend to protect the rights of the individual, and which would get away from these crazy dynastic wars.
Yeah.
So, you know, there were lessons that were learned there. And I think there are moments in history when we do learn lessons, after suffering, after terrible dislocation, and people finally wake up and say, this is it, I've had enough. And they reject the old rotten ideas and they move up. I think the society today is more moral. I heard an interesting comment that said that the fact that nuclear weapons exist has actually reduced wars in the world, and it very well may have. Do we want to have, next time you have a big war, it's not just a bunch of guys going out with, on horseback. I mean, now you can drop a nuclear bomb. So there's a little more reluctance on the part of nations to do it. Anyway.
I'll have to see if the lessons are learned. Right now, we seem to be in the trough rather than.
Well, we have to learn the lessons now. That's the job of people who can, analyze that and describe it and try to reach people and reach enough people that we can wake up. So anyway, Mike, what do you have coming up on your Substack?
We're gonna look into this conspiracy theory thing.
Okay.
And see where that goes. But as always, we watch the current society with alarm, I guess, as they used to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And as always, there'll be something to talk about next week.
What's the name of the Substack?
It's Mike's Point of View, MDS POV.substack.com.
Okay. Just want to make sure I get that. How is it going? I mean, are you having a good, are you developing an audience?
The interesting about it is we always have considerably more views than we have subscribers.
Sure.
So that there are these incognito people coming on there. Which is
no,
fun.
That's natural. I mean, even like, for my Rumble session, I always have a lot more views than, the same thing with YouTube when they let me be on there.
Yeah,
that's just how it is.
Just want alert, which is great.
Sure. You're getting it out. That's
Yeah.
true. So let me just mention again, please subscribe on Rumble, all of the TikTokers. I'm getting some wild comments on TikTok. I'm not even going to start. But thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you for watching live on Rumble. Michael D. Shaw, as always, thank you for joining me. Excellent conversation.
My pleasure. And we'll do it again.
You bet. Thank you.
Same time, same station.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.